Well, today we will start with the four great aspects of the mother. In our previous class, I think we did just this paragraph, four great aspects of the mother, four of her leading powers and personalities. So today we will take up one by one. First one, as all of you know, is about Maheshwari. So let us give this long para a first reading. Imperial Maheshwari is seated in the wideness above the thinking mind and will, and sublimates and greatens them into wisdom and largeness, or floods with a splendor beyond them. For she is the mighty and wise one, who opens us to the supramental infinities and the cosmic vastness, to the grandeur of the supreme light, to a treasure house of miraculous knowledge, to the measureless movement of the Mother's eternal forces. Tranquil is she and wonderful, great and calm forever. Nothing can move her, because all wisdom is in her. Nothing is hidden from her that she chooses to know. She comprehends all things and all beings and their nature and what moves them, and the law of the world and its times, and how all was and is and must be. A strength is in her that meets everything and masters, and none can prevail in the end against her vast, intangible wisdom and high, tranquil power. Equal, patient, and unalterable in her will, she deals with men according to their nature, and with things and happenings according to their force and the truth that is in them. Partiality she has none, but she follows the decrees of the Supreme, and some she raises up, and some she casts down or puts away from her into the darkness. To the wise she gives a greater and more luminous wisdom. Those that have vision she admits to her counsels. On the hostile she imposes the consequence of their hostility. The ignorant and foolish she leads according to their blindness. In each man she answers and handles the different elements of his nature according to their need and their urge and the return they call for, puts on them the required pressure, or leaves them to their cherished liberty to prosper in the ways of the ignorance or to perish. For she is above all, bound by nothing, attached to nothing in the universe. Yet has she more than any other the heart of the universal Mother. For her compassion is endless and inexhaustible. All are to her eyes her children and portions of the One. even the Asura and Rakshasa and Pisacha and those that are revolted and hostile. Even her rejections are only a postponement. Even her punishments are a grace. But her compassion does not blind her wisdom or turn her action from the course decreed. For the truth of things is her one concern. Knowledge, her center of power, and to build our soul and our nature into the divine truth, her mission and her labor. So we get a beautiful description of Imperial Maheshwari. Well, as such, the concepts are clear. But as I said, we will put together more or less whatever I can find. Commentaries from Sri Aurobindo and the Mother. Because as I told you in my previous class, there's not much of philosophy here. These are pure intuitive truths that have been given a human language. And as Sri Aurobindo writes in one of his letters, that he has written from an over mental angle all that he wrote, especially in the Arya. And he says, I have brought that over mental angle to the level of the mind. So he has used logic, because for the mind, logic is of great importance. So he had to take recourse to mental logic, but the truths are seen from an over mental angle. So we now understand why it is so difficult to understand Sri Aurobindo, because constantly he is dealing with a multifaceted truth. He does not present truth in any single manner. He is always trying to capture in the very human language this multi-sidedness of the higher truths. So he has kind of strained the human language, English, and kind of expanded it to the maximum possible to capture this multiple dimensions of the truth. Perhaps, that's my personal guess, I may be wrong, if he had used the language of Sanskrit, perhaps he could have written more easily, if I can say, because Sanskrit as such is already used to giving this multi-sided truth, especially as we have seen right from the Vedas to the Upanishads. It has obtained the richness of suggestion. So each word, each phrase can have different levels of meaning, which I suppose would be very suitable for an over mental truth. But that was not to be, because as the mother herself writes in one of her diary notes, that she wanted to give to mankind the higher knowledge in the present language that could be understood by modern persons. So obviously Sri Aurobindo did not use Sanskrit, but he has given English language that richness of the Sanskrit language. So it is difficult for us initially, and of course it will always be, to capture his thought. And of course this multi-dimensional aspect is seen in its highest density in Savitri. So we see Savitri to be the most difficult, because there perhaps even the English language is not able to capture the real experience of Sri Aurobindo. And as the mother has said many a time, that actually no language is fully ready to capture when it translates the higher truth. There's a lot of the higher truth that gets missed. I mean, the very fact that you express, you put into words, a lot of things are lost. So I suppose in Savitri, the best has been done. So I'm giving you all this explanation only to tell ourselves that the description of these four aspects of the mother are of that level of language and vision, and they have that power of invocation. Well, before I take up this aspect of Imperial Maheshwari, I would like to revise one thing that we had discussed earlier. That is regarding these four great aspects of the mother. Previously we were discussing what Sri Aurobindo writes about these four great aspects. This is I'm taking from page 63 of this volume 25. If you remember, there was a line here which says, in a sense, the four powers of the mother may be called, because of their origin, her emanations, just as the gods may be called emanations of the divine. But they have a more permanent and fixed character. They are at once independent beings allowed their play by the Adya Shakti, and yet portions of the mother, the Mahashakti. And she can always either manifest through them as separate beings or draw them together as her own various personalities and hold them in herself, sometimes kept back, sometimes at play, according to her will. In the supramental plane, they are always in her and do not act independently, but as intimate portions of the supramental Mahashakti, and in close union and harmony with each other. So what we have been given here is that these four aspects, they are always in her on the supramental plane. Now there is a bit of a confusion, because in another letter, I'll get to that when we come to the passage, Sri Aurobindo mentions that their origin is the overmind. So he says, on the overmental plane, they have a golden color, a beautiful form, etc. And in a couple of sentences, even the mother has the same thing. She says, in their origin, they are overmind. They are from the overmind. And here we have the sentence, in the supramental plane, they are always in her and do not act independently, but as intimate portions of the supramental Mahashakti. So I was trying to find out what is the relation between these four aspects on the supramental plane as well as on the overmental plane. So what I'm trying to see is, how do we connect these four supramental beings with the word their origin is in the overmind? Well, I've been thinking about that, and maybe I'm coming to some kind of a deeper understanding. That is, he says these are four great aspects of the mother, four of her leading powers and personalities. So maybe it is like this, that on the supramental level, they are more powers and personalities who do not yet have a form. It is only on the overmental level that these four aspects gain or acquire a specific form. Because on the supramental level there is no such form given to them. That's why Sri Aurobindo can give us an explanation. In a letter he says that Maheshwari herself has many forms in her lesser manifestations. So, in her lesser manifestations, who are Durga, Uma, Parvati, Chandi, etc. So, we see a kind of a hierarchy of the same Godheads, of the same goddesses. So, on the supramental level, they are formless, and there are aspects and powers of the supramental Shakti. But when it comes to the lower level of overmind, they get a form, a specific function, a specific power, and then they themselves come down to the earth level in yet again different forms, in lesser godheads, as you would put here, lesser manifestation, like Durga and Uma and Parvati and Chandi. We have 12 big names which I have not gathered here. So there is now, I can put them all together as powers, supramental level, goddesses on the overmental level, and down below, lesser powers of the same goddess. That's Maheshwari. So similarly, if Maheshwari is that, Mahakali has her own forms, Maheshwari, Saraswati has her own forms, Mahalakshmi would have her own forms. So that was the first confusion I had when I started reading these descriptions, and then I had to find a kind of a synthesis in all of them, between them. So in the very first sentence, Imperial Maheshwari is seated in the wideness above the thinking mind and will. Someone asked the mother about this question. This is an answer from page 104 from your blue book here. Imperial Maheshwari is seated in the wideness above and thinking mind and will. Is there a plane of will as there is a mental plane, a vital plane? You see, it is a very important question, because if Sri Aurobindo says she is seated in the wideness above the thinking mind, well, we can imagine the thinking mind, yes, what it is we have an experience. But is there a plane of will? Of the mind, yes, mental consciousness we know. But is there a plane of will? And the mother's reply, I have explained to you in connection with Sachidananda. Sachidananda exists at the very origin of the worlds. But there is a Sachidananda behind all the other states of being. You could make a diagram, though that does not explain much. It is quite an erroneous idea, but it makes things more easily understandable. You arrange the states of being according to a scale. Then you have the earth below and the supreme above. It's not at all like that, I hasten to tell you. But anyway, it is easy to understand. You put the earth at the bottom and the supreme at the top, and you divide that into lots of little parts, each of which represents a state of being. That makes a kind of a ladder. Well, we had spoken about this. I remember I had explained this idea before, but now we are reading it from the Mother. So, and then you have, as though behind it, behind your ladder, something which supports it, against which it leans. So try to gather the image that supposing this is a wall and there is a ladder that is leaning against this wall. Now in the ladder we have rungs of the ladder, and she is saying each of this rung represents one level of consciousness. The lowest one we could call as the matter, then the vital, the mental, the higher mind, etc., until you go to the highest level, that of the supermind. But this whole ladder is leaning on the wall. Now she says, what is this wall? It is not a wall, but it is something which supports your ladder. And that is precisely the first principle of the universal form. In Hindu terminology, it is called Satchidananda. So you see, the wall is the Satchidananda, the ladder is it represents the different levels. I mean, this is one of the most magnificent explanations, and it's after I read this, a lot of my ideas got cleared. Because I used to always wonder that every sadhu, every great yogi says, I have realized the Supreme, I have realized the Satchidananda, I have seen God. So what is the difference in Sri Aurobindo saying that I have realized Satchidananda, or a Ramana saying that, or an ex-guru saying that? They cannot be telling lies. And at the same time, it's clear that it cannot be the same experience of the same consciousness. So that was my question, which got clarified here. Then she says, it is there, everything leans upon that. Without that, nothing could exist. It is that which upholds and allows an existence. Then, if you enter a certain state of consciousness and find yourself, for instance, in the higher mind, for generally it is more easily there that this happens, you have started from the physical and climbed slowly, rung by rung, as far as the higher mind. But instead of continuing your ascent on the ladder, you enter into a kind of interiorization and try to go out of the form. You pass into a kind of silence outside the form. You pass in between the bars of your ladder and enter straight into Satchidananda, which supports everything from behind. And then you can have mentally the experience of Satchidananda. So we see that this wall is there behind every rung of the ladder. So if from one rung, if you go deep, if you go within interiorization, as she calls, you will end up in this experience of Satchidananda. But that will be an experience of Satchidananda on the mental level. Then at the same time from the vital also, like we have all this bhakti gan, all these pujas, all these bhakti bhajans. People say, I can experience Godhead, I have touched the divinity there. So what do? From the vital level, they go deep within and they touch the wall, or they touch the experience of Satchidananda. So on each level, if you go deep within, vitally, even physically. You see, there is the possibility that in the physical itself you can realize the divine. How is it possible? Because on the physical level, on the level of matter, if you go deep within, you will end up in the divine consciousness. So she says, you pass in between the bars of your ladder and enter straight into Satchidananda, which supports everything from behind, and then you can have mentally the experience of Satchidananda. I have known people who had it and thought they had reached the heights of the Supreme. For there is a similarity in the experience, a very great likeness, only it is limited to the mind. The mind alone participates in it. Well, for the will, it is the same thing. Now I think we are getting this idea. She says very clearly, I have known people who had it and thought they had reached the heights of the Supreme, for there is a similarity in the experience, a very great likeness, only it is limited to the mind. The mind alone participates in it. So we begin to understand the difference between Sri Aurobindo and Sri Ramakrishna and Sri Ramana and any other great yogi. I mean, somebody may be at the level of the higher mind, somebody at the illumined mind, and when they go deep, they have the Satchidananda. And so everyone says, I have seen God, I have seen the divine, I have experienced the divine. There is some semblance of, obviously, the wall has the same nature. And yet, what experiences from you get if you go from the mental level is the divine presented to you on the mental level, and the divine experienced only by the mental consciousness. So that is an incredible thing which supports Sri Aurobindo's concept of the transformation. You can touch the divine on every level. You don't necessarily have to go through the psychic, through the jiva, through the Atman to realize the Satchidananda. Physically, you can contact the divine. That's what I was given to understand in one of my conversations with Pranodda many years back. I used to work with him and we had discussion about this. Then I still remember he had said, yes, Mother had told him on the physical level you can contact the divine. So it was no more necessary that you have to ascend all these levels of the physical, the vital, the mental, the psychic and the spiritual, etc. And that also tells you how and why the supermind can come into your being on any level. It can be on the physical level. You don't have to go through the whole corridor of the psychic being and the mental and the vital and then come to the physical. So, just as you can experience the divine on any level, so the divine can come to you on any level directly. So too, the supermind can invade your body. It can come into your vital, the emotional part. It can really influence your mind. It can come into the psychic, whichever level. So we have a full explanation and a very clear explanation, and then she comes to the point where she answers the question. Well, for the will it is the same thing. Instead of being the support of the ladder, it is a kind of force, a very powerful current which passes through all these states starting from above. It is the supreme will and coming down into the physical manifestation. Hence, if you get into affinity with this vibration or this force, you can enter the state of will. That is, whatever state of being you may find yourself in, physical, vital, mental, if you enter a certain state of consciousness and force, you come into contact with the power of will. It penetrates into you and you can use it for any purpose. If your reception is free from all egoism, if you are pure, completely surrendered, and accept only what comes from the divine, And if you don't mix anything with it, egoism or desires or limitations, well, it is a state a bit difficult to attain. But if you attain it, you receive this force of will in its original state, pure, for it comes down pure. It is only in its reception that it gets deformed. Then instead of being your will, it becomes an expression of the divine will. And this happens without your leaving the physical body. You can receive the force of the divine will without leaving the physical. Well, here the thought is a little more complex. But having understood that common wall represented by God or divine, who is there behind every effort, she now takes the same image to say, behind the physical, vital, mental, all these layers, there is something called willpower. It can be a physical willpower, it can be a mental willpower, it can be a psychic willpower, an emotional willpower. Will is common to all of them. So she says, you can activate this will on any level. So, an athlete, you are having this Olympics these days, you see this is such a tremendous improvement on all levels, because there is a great effort on the physical will. They are not exerting their mental will, there is a physical will, and with that physical will they are attaining greater heights of perfection. So that is there on all levels.